When I was in college in New York City, I walked everywhere. I had at least a 20 to 30-minute walk just to get to class and then more walking throughout the day between buildings. Around my sophomore year, I started experimenting with how little I could eat. I thought I was being efficient, productive. I'd eat as late in the day as possible, telling myself that I was like saving calories. I felt sharp, I felt in control. And honestly, for a while it seemed to work. I'd pull all-nighters studying, living on popcorn and Diet Coke, trying to keep my calories as low as humanly possible. And in the beginning, I actually felt like I had energy. But over time, something shifted. I remember trying to leave my apartment one morning and feeling so lightheaded just walking down the first flight of stairs. A walk I'd done hundreds of times suddenly felt hard. The daily walking that was just part of my life became exhausting. I kept trying to push through it though, I really did. But eventually my body made it clear that this was not sustainable. I didn't stop because I changed my mind. I stopped because I could not function. And that experience planted a seed I wouldn't fully understand until much later, that skipping meals can feel productive in the short term, but it comes at a cost that the body will eventually collect. What mattered at the time was that the year before, I had lost weight pretty easily on my first real diet. And once I'd done that, I became terrified of gaining it back. That was new for me. Suddenly eating wasn't just about hunger. It felt like something that I had to manage perfectly. And skipping meals started to feel like the safest way to stay in control. Looking back, that's when my relationship with food started to quietly shift. Not because I wanted to hurt my body, but because I was trying to hold on to something that had felt easy once and was suddenly very hard to maintain. This is the Set Point Science podcast, where we explore the science behind how your body and brain regulate weight for good. I'm Sherry Alberts, and here we talk about weight loss through the lens of physiology, psychology, and nervous system regulation, not discipline, not deprivation, and not white-knuckling your way through hunger. Today's episode is about something that almost everyone who has ever dieted has experienced, but rarely questioned: why skipping meals feels productive, and why that strategy almost always backfires over time. What I didn't understand back then, and what I see so clearly now, is that I wasn't just skipping meals. I was trying to hold on. In that first year in college, I'd lost weight for the first time, and it felt really easy. That's the part that no one prepares you for, that first success. Because once your body learns that weight can come off through restriction, it also learns that it might have to defend it against gaining it back. Skipping meals didn't feel extreme to me at the time. It felt responsible. It felt protective. It felt like the safest way to make sure I didn't lose what I'd worked so hard for earlier. And for a while, it worked, or at least it seemed to. I felt almost rewarded for not eating. But what actually was happening, I was like running on borrowed energy. My stress hormones were propping me up, my appetite was being suppressed, and my body was quietly keeping score. Eventually, it always does. And that's the part I want to unpack today. Not to tell you how often you should eat, but to explain why hunger paired with control can feel like productivity, but why the body eventually pushes back when nourishment stops feeling reliable. Physiologically, skipping meals feels productive because when glucose drops, that HPA axis that we're always talking about, it triggers the release of cortisol and adrenaline to mobilize stored glycogen or stored sugars. This creates a hunter state of high focus and suppressed appetite. It feels like productivity, but it is actually a stress-mediated state, not a relaxed, regulated one. This is that borrowed energy. Eventually, the body compensates by reducing energy output, leaving you cold, lightheaded, or less resilient. This is where the backfire happens. The system lowers your basal metabolic rate and increases ghrelin, the hunger hormone, later in the day, causing that inevitable evening overeating. Biology always wins over willpower, eventually. This applies to practices like a 1 meal a day type thing. While the body can adapt to a 1 meal schedule, adaptation isn't the same as regulation. For those with a dieting history, the nervous system often stays stress dependent rather than relaxing into the rhythm. Unlike our ancestors who ate based on availability, modern fasting is often a strategy driven by control and fear. To your body, the number of meals matters less than whether nourishment actually feels reliable. When food is predictable, the body spends energy freely. When it's uncertain, it conserves. Productivity driven by hunger works until it doesn't. Then the system pulls the brakes because regulation always wins over force. Let's pause here. If this is landing for you, you might feel a sense of recognition or even relief, not because you've got a whole new plan or something, but because you realize you're not broken. Seeing your past choices as adaptations your body used to survive is a powerful shift. To support these ideas, I've created a free, gentle weight loss guide. It's not a rigid plan or a set of rules. It's just calm orientation to how weight regulation works when your body feels supported rather than managed. You can find it at setpointscience.com/podcast guide. There's no pressure to use it perfectly. It's just a companion for your journey. So now let's look deeply at how this pattern shows up in daily life. Once you recognize these moments, it becomes much easier to respond with curiosity instead of judgment. So it rarely shows up as a dramatic decision to skip meals. It's just quiet. It happens quietly in everyday life. You push breakfast later because mornings feel calmer when you don't eat, or you feel like you're saving calories, or you skip lunch because you're on a roll and you don't want to break focus. You tell yourself you'll eat later, just after this one more thing. Often that works for a while. It seems like it works, at least at first. You feel sharp, efficient, you get stuff done. You feel almost rewarded for not eating until you don't. Later that night shows up as irritability, brain fog, or an afternoon crash, or overeating later, not because you lack control, but because your body is just collecting what it was owed for what you used up that day already. So this is where people turn on themselves. They assume that they ruined something, or they can't be trusted, or there's just something wrong with them. Why can't I get over this nighttime eating? But what's happening is actually much simpler. It's just that your body learned nourishment was being postponed, and so it responded later by getting louder, not weaker. When you see this as neutral, you see this pattern instead of a flaw, it's just a pattern. It's just something that you do. Something shifts. You stop asking, hey, what's wrong with me? And start asking, what does my body actually need to feel steady? Maybe steadiness will help. The shift isn't forcing a schedule or proving discipline. It's noticing why skipping meals feels helpful and what it's actually providing. For many people, it's not the absence of the food that creates the focus. It's quieter decision making, a sense of control, less stimulation. Indigestion is a rest and digest parasympathetic activity. For a high achiever, the slowing down that comes with eating can feel like a threat to your momentum, especially if you're in the middle of a busy workday. But once you see that, you have options. Sometimes the most supportive move is offering a small signal of reliability, eating earlier than feels necessary, or choosing something simple instead of just waiting until hunger feels urgent. Not to optimize, not to fix yourself, but to remind your nervous system gently that food is coming and it doesn't need to stay on high alert. When nourishment feels predictable, focus stops depending on deprivation, and weight regulation becomes more of a response than a fight. From a psychological perspective, this pattern is actually incredibly logical. Your brain isn't making a mistake. It's following a map it has drawn over time. When you skip a meal and suddenly feel a surge of focus or productivity, even if it's just temporary, your brain learns that connection instantly. This is a classic form of negative reinforcement. In this context, negative doesn't mean bad. It means the removal of something. So hunger effectively reduces internal noise and quiets the friction of decision making. Your brain flags that quiet, sharp state you have as useful, and it wants to repeat it. Over time, this evolves into state-dependent learning. Your brain starts to associate clarity, control, and high performance, right? Getting a lot done at work with being underfueled. Conversely, it begins to pair the act of eating with distraction or a loss of momentum. This is why eating can eventually start to feel disruptive, not because food itself is the problem, but because your brain has learned to perform exclusively in that stress-activated state. There's also a powerful illusion of control at play. For many of us, skipping meals creates a sense of mastery over the body. That feeling of being above your hunger is psychologically soothing, even when it comes at a high physiological cost. We often skip meals because our calculator brain thinks we're getting ahead, mathematically banking a calorie deficit now so we'll have more room later. It feels like a strategic win in the moment, but your body experiences that missing fuel as a resource emergency, not a savings account. And we believe actually that we're saving those calories, so that feels so productive. Biologically, that sharpness you feel is often a mild euphoria caused by the release of something called BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Evolutionarily, this was the brain's way of making you smart enough to find food when resources were scarce. But in our modern world, however, it simply reinforces the addictive quality of that productive hunger loop. So the pattern is then further locked in by confirmation bias, which is the brain's habit of noticing only what confirms the existing story. So on days you skip a meal and feel sharp, your brain takes a mental screenshot as proof that that strategy works. On days you eat and feel sluggish, your brain treats that as evidence that food is the enemy, even if your fatigue was actually caused by poor sleep or stress. None of this means you're broken or lack willpower. I gotta always remind you that. It means that your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do. Repeat what it thinks is working. The real challenge isn't your self-discipline. It's that your brain hasn't yet learned that nourishment and clarity can coexist. You've been conditioned to believe that focus must be earned through deprivation. Shifting this doesn't require force. It requires repetition. It starts by offering your body and brain a new, consistent experience of reliability, showing your system, one meal at a time, that it can be both fueled and focused. So here's the reframe. The problem isn't that you eat too often, and it's not that you don't have enough discipline to skip meals. The real problem is that your body learned to associate productivity, safety, or control with being underfueled. When that happens, eating actually starts to feel risky, not consciously, but physiologically. Focus feels earned through hunger, and nourishment feels like something you have to justify. Seeing through that lens, skipping meals isn't a failure of self-care. It's an attempt at regulation, actually. Your body was trying to create steadiness, and the only way it knew how, by staying alert. The shift isn't to force yourself to eat more or less. The shift is to help your system learn that it can feel steady and nourished at the same time. When the body no longer has to choose between clarity and food, everything changes. Weight regulation becomes more responsive. Focus becomes less fragile. And eating stops feeling like a disruption that has to be managed. This is why sustainable weight loss doesn't come from stricter timing or longer fasting windows. It comes from restoring trust, so the body doesn't need hunger to stay awake or focused. When nourishment feels reliable, the nervous system relaxes. And when the nervous system relaxes, the body releases what it no longer needs to hold. As you move through your days, the invitation here isn't to monitor your meals more closely. It's to notice what role hunger has been playing. Has it been a source of focus, a sense of control, a way to stay alert, or trying to save calories, or a way to avoid slowing down? When you see your own patterns clearly, you don't need to fight them anymore. You can just start responding a little differently. Instead of asking, how long can I go without eating? The question becomes, what helps my body feel steady enough to function without borrowing energy? If you want one simple experiment this week, just try eating at a time you normally wouldn't. Not because you're especially hungry, not because it's time, just because your body is usually underfueled there, perhaps. And then I want you to notice what happens later. You don't have to do this all the time. Just try it once or twice and see what happens to your evening hunger. What happens to your focus during the day? Does it feel louder or quieter at night? The fuel stuff. It's not about fixing anything quickly. It's about giving your system data over time about how it responds when nourishment is more predictable. Sometimes that means eating earlier than feels necessary. Sometimes it means choosing something real simple and small instead of waiting for hunger to peak. Not because you should, but because you're teaching your nervous system that nourishment is reliable and focus doesn't depend on deprivation. That's how patterns unwind, not through force, but through repetition, safety, and curiosity. And just to ground this in real life, when I started doing this myself, it was not easy. I began eating, this was a few years ago, I started to just try to eat at my first true hunger signal of the day, the one I used to ignore. For me, that was around 7 or 8 in the morning. And actually, it was very surprising to learn that that's when my first hunger signal was, because I'd been pushing hunger off for so long, for so many years. When I started eating at that first signal, what surprised me, I was worried, that I was going to end up overeating all day because I was doing that calorie math. But what surprised me was that eating earlier actually made my evenings easier, not harder. Hunger felt calmer later in the day. But this all took time. I had to coach myself through it, reminding myself that this was just an experiment. It wasn't a permanent rule. It's just something I was going to try and see what happened. And that mattered because it went directly against something that I had been doing for years. And I thought it was really important to do for years, skipping meals and saving calories and all that. That's often the hardest part for us, is not the actual eating itself, but allowing yourself to gather new data when an old strategy once felt safe. If today's episode resonated, I want you to know this. Nothing you heard means you've been doing anything wrong. I'm going to say that until I'm blue in the face. It means that your body has adapted intelligently to the conditions that it was in. And adaptation can always evolve. Humans are always capable of adapting to new situations. If you want a gentle place to explore this more, you can download my free gentle weight loss guide at setpointscience.com/podcast guide. It's there as a companion, not a plan, not a checklist. And if this episode helped reframe something for you in that beautiful brain of yours, I'd love for you to share it or leave a review. That's how this work reaches the people who need to hear it. Until next time, remember, your body isn't resisting you. It's just responding to what it's been taught. And when the signal changes, the response does too.